Hello everyone, I would like to welcome you to the next Pipin webinar series, and we'll take another maybe 2 minutes while other participants are joining. Meanwhile, you can just use the chat box to introduce where you are joining from and your position, and you can just use the chat box for introducing yourself while we give at least 2 minutes for the participants to join. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all participants joining us across Fiji, Tonga, Vanuatu, and the Pacific and beyond. Thank you for being here today as we explore practical pathways to applying IUCN's nature-based solution standards in our unique island context. Your presence and insight will make this session dynamic and very collaborative. Together, let's learn, share, and strengthen our collective efforts to protect ecosystems and communities. So I hope you all are ready to dive in. So looking at this, before I move on to the webinars, I have some housekeeping matters, requesting if you could have mute your mic at all times unless you are speaking. And for question and answer sessions, there's allocated time, so you can write it in the chat box. And of course, you can also raise your hands to unmute and speak. And thank you for your attendance again. Please continue to attend all the session because at the end of the 8 webinar series, we will be presented a professional certificate in nature-based solutions. So to end that, please do attend all the sessions. And if you are joining as teams, like if you are joining with more than one participants together in groups, please in the chat box, let us know so we can capture the attendance. And if you look at webinar 2, after setting the foundation in webinar 1, we'll move to webinar 2, and this is on IUCN's Global Standards on nature-based solution, from guiding principles to practical application, a pathway to effective nature-based solutions. So now we'll be moving on the technical aspects from this webinar. And the expected outcome is to understand the core principles, criteria, indicators of IUCN's global standards for NbS, including how to use the self-assessment tool for evaluation. Learn how to apply these standards in planning, implementation, and evaluation, and also explore case studies showcasing successes, challenges, and best practices. Build skills to assess and align NbS project with IUCN's global standard for impact. So let's quickly go over the agenda. I'll briefly go over the agenda. So our first speaker is Mr. Ludwig, and he's with SPC. He's nature-based solution mainstreaming advisor. So he will set the stage for the first introduction of IUCN's global standards, criteria, indicators, and also he will present the NbS self-assessment tool. Followed by him, we have Vinay. He's a regional NbS He's a regional NbS programs lead with the IUCN, and he will present on the current work to adapt the standards to align with local traditions and overall Pacific context. So he will align the standard with the Pacific context about the work that is currently being done in the Pacific Islands on nature-based solution with the NbS global standards. Then we have a brief Q&A session for speaker 1 and 2. And then we'll move to a breakout session. In this breakout session, you will make sense of the NbS standards and collective insights, where you'll be working in groups to identify the standards, and you'll be given 3 questions, and you'll be working in the group for around 15 minutes, and then I'll give more details later on these breakout groups. And then after the breakout groups, we have Georgia. She is a monitoring, evaluation, and learning lead but in climate resilient nature initiative. She will be looking at applying and adapting standards to monitoring and evaluation. And finally, we have Martin. He's a regional project manager for My Coast project, and he will give us perception from a manager on insights from implementations. it's coming from a project manager's perspective. And then we'll have another Q&A session, and then we close up this. And then these are the speakers that I have mentioned, and when they are delivering, of course, they will introduce themselves. So thank you so much for that. And now we will move, we now dive into the IUCN's Global Standards, which we have the first speaker, Ludwig from SPC. He will explain on the global criteria and how it can guide locally relevant solution for climate resilience in the Pacific.
Hi, sorry guys, I have a power cut at home. I hope you're able to hear me. I'm on my mobile network. Should be fine. Can you hear me, Rakeshni?
Yes, you want me to share the screen, your presentation, Ludo?
I can do it, I guess. Let me try it. Is it my turn? Sorry for that.
Yeah.
Just unexpected, of course. So can you see my screen?
Yes, Ludo, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. I hope the connection will remain stable. Hopefully, yes. I prefer if you can share the screen, Rakeshni. Sorry, I've got an issue here.
Okay, I'm sharing.
Thank you. So sorry for that. Always the right timing. Because my bandwidth is not very ideal, so. So while you're sharing the screen, maybe I can start giving a few words. So the idea of the presentation for myself is really to try to break down a little bit the NbS standards and make them a bit more digest for you. It's a complex standards, and so the idea is really to try to break it down, going through each of the indicators and criterion mainly for you to better understand what the concept of IUCN standards is about. So maybe we can start with the next slide, Rakeshni, please. I would like to start with some context information on explaining, thank you, why these standards have been developed and how they have been developed. So the logic behind was that as NbS entered into PC and was adopted by projects on the ground, there was a pressing need to greater clarity and precision of what the concept of NbS entails. We've seen the definition last week during the webinar, but it's more than that, is to see what is required for it to be deployed successfully. Without these standards, the application of NbS could result in inconsistent or even ungrounded applications. Therefore, the standards provide the opportunity for users to help guide the implementation on the ground while also accelerating policy development. So using the standards, NbS are based on a common understanding, a common interpretation, and a shared vision for sustainable NbS practices. The aim of the standard is to equip the users, which we are we all are potentially, with a robust framework for designing and verifying what NbS will achieve, the desired outcomes in solving one or several societal challenges. As a reminder, last week we've seen as part of the definition that NbS standards is identifying 7 societal challenges so far, which are climate change mitigation and adaptation, disaster risk reduction, economic and social development, human health, food security, water security, and environmental degradation and biodiversity loss. The idea is for individual intervention on the ground, applying the standards that gives tangible added value. First, the result can give credibility to the intervention when you speak to investor, partners, government, donors, or any other stakeholders. The second advantage of using the standards is to provide individual intervention as well with recommendation for improvement, using the result of the self-assessment as a way to identify gaps, but also solution. And third, the standard can be used as a means of engagement and communication across sectors with partners while starting conversation and providing a common framework and language. On the other hand, the donors or financier funders can invest in NbS with confidence that the standard provides. It shows a proof that if you apply your standards properly, that you developed robust nature-based solutions. That's the rationale behind the development of the NbS standards. How it's been developed? It's been developed like following 2 years of public consultation, including more than 800 contributors, 9 expert groups across 100 countries. So the standard is really like international, and now there is a need to adapt to some regional context as well, which Vinay will present following my presentation. Next slide, please, Rakeshni. So now that we have seen why these standards have been developed, let's have a look at what are these standards exactly and how they've been made more precisely. So the global standards, it's a set of 8 criteria and 28 associated indicators. Average one criterion has 3 indicators, but in some cases you have 4 or up to 5 indicators. And this set of criteria and indicators address the pillars of sustainable development, economy, environment, but also society, and resilient program management. These standards are encouraged to be implemented using existing project management tools, such as a log frame. We really encourage users to use some of these indicators and mainstream them into their monitoring and evaluation frameworks, such as the logical framework. The alignment of the indicator with the existing reporting and operational management system will help you to minimize any additional work that may be needed to implement your NbS intervention, but also to use the standard. So the earlier you do it, the better. And the more you embed them into your day-to-day activities, the easier it will be for you, because you will see that these are not very, very easy standards to apprehend in the first place. The advantage that government companies and NGOs can use these standards and also associated guide and materials, which I will present in the next slide. It has been developed to enable the users to calculate by themselves a percentage match of their intervention against the 8 criteria. So it's basically can be seen as well as the evaluation grid for you to assess your project and identify which are the gaps, the room for improvement, and what is already pretty well developed. So if we move to the next slide, I would like to give you a quick overview about the criterion. That's the 3 material I was talking about, sorry. And that are made available for you within the share folders. You can find the IUCN Global Standard document, which summarizes exactly what we will do today, is a criterion as well as the indicators. You've got another separate document, which is about guiding document. It's a guide to help you better understand in depth what are these indicators and criteria about, and the self-assessment tool, which is either online or using an Excel sheet, which I will present to you in a bit. Next slide, please. So I invite you to have a look at these resources, download them, and getting familiar with them. So this is the 8 criteria which makes the IUCN Global Standard. If you look at criterion 1, NbS effectively address societal challenges, this criterion is focusing on identifying the societal challenge to which your nature-based solution is a response. And the priority for this one is to leverage the potential of nature-based solution to provide, as we said in the last webinar, multiple benefits, whether they are socioeconomic or environmental. The criterion 2 is about scale. Scale in this context primarily refers to the geographical scale across land and sea, but also the scale in terms of economic, ecological, and societal aspects. The target area where the societal challenge is being addressed is often part of a bigger system. And if we talk about ecosystem, we often tend to focus on one specific ecosystem, but the interconnection of this ecosystem with the surrounding ecosystems, which makes a big landscape, as we say. So it's a landscape is a composition of several ecosystems. It's very important to make sure that your activity is not a standalone one, but is taking into consideration this entire context. The next 3 criteria about the net gain, biodiversity net gain, economical viability, and inclusive and transparent governance process, is a 3 pillar, again, of sustainable development. And you need to understand for this one, what are your current resources? You need to develop accurate baseline, and that will be essential to guarantee that you can monitor this criterion effectively. But they are about, like I said, measuring the biodiversity outcome, the economical viability, and the governance process of NbS, which must be inclusive. The criterion 6, which is about the balance of trade-off, address the choices that needs to be made to achieve short and long-term gains, and how to ensure that there is a transparent, equitable, and inclusive process to determine this trade-off. The criterion 7, it's about management and response to the need for adaptive management, which facilitate continuous learning process and also adapting the NbS according to systemic changes. But the true potential of NbS is realized through its long-term implementation scale, its sustainability, and mainstreaming the concept of NbS and action into policy or even regulatory frameworks, as well as linking to national target or international commitment can enable this. And this is what about the criterion 8 is about. So now that I gave you this overview of the criterion, I would like to start some deep dive and start to screen all these 8 criterion one by one so that you get a better understanding of what they are. So if we can move to next slide, please, Rashni. Again, the idea of today, because this is a quite dense topic, the idea is to give you a first overview about the standards. And we invite you again to read all the resources, but also get back to us in case you have any question. Even beyond the webinar series, we are more than happy to provide any support you may have when you try applying these standards, and we will be very happy to support you on that and provide guidance on your specific areas or projects. So if we look at this first criteria in more details, as we said, it's about ensuring that NbS, your activities, effectively tackle the key societal and environmental issues that we just presented, which could be either risk reduction, water security, climate, and so on. some of the societal challenges that have been identified. So the first step for you is really to identify what's your priority. You need to define to which societal challenge your NbS, which societal challenge your NbS will address. It can be one at a very bare minimum, but often we see that NbS are addressing several societal challenges at the same time. You also need to be clear about what the challenge is and clearly describe and record what the NbS is solving. If you understand your context, you will be more likely to develop like very appropriate and relevant activity to address these challenges. And again, it's a lot about monitoring this progress. So it's very important to measure the socioeconomic outcome and to measure how well these societal changes have been addressed as part of your activities. So that would be the first one when developing nature-based solution, is to look at this overall context and challenges. Some questions that you can ask yourself to see if you are on track or if there is still some gaps for this criterion is to look at, are societal challenges identified? Are right holders and beneficiaries consulted properly? Are the most pressing societal challenges for right holders and beneficiaries prioritized? Because you won't be able to address all challenges, but even if you need to take them into consideration. Are human well-being outcomes relevant to the identified societal challenges identified? So that's the type of question you're invited to ask yourself and your team when you develop, but also when you want to assess a project. Let's move to the next slide, please. Perfect. Thank you, Rakeshni. So criterion 2 is about scale again. So it's about ensuring that your nature-based solution takes into account the broader context, broader socio-ecological context, and works across all these scales. It's about linking people, nature, and economy, which is by definition what a nature-based solution is. It's how we can make people working better with natures. And which is, again, a difference with conservation measures. It's to understand your ecosystem, but also the surrounding ecosystems, the communities which will be directly impacted by your project, but also indirectly impacted, and all the economy that affect each other. Once you identify these linkages, you're invited to connect with other ongoing initiative or solution. What's happening next door will have an impact on your activity, same as your activity will have an impact to the next or surrounding ecosystem of our environment, because which is specifically true in our Pacific context, where all these ecosystems are interconnected, and this is where we often talk about reach to reef, for example, approaches. So you need, when you can, to acknowledge which are the ongoing activities around your sites and see if you can find any linkages possible. It can be some infrastructures that are developed nearby. It can be some current policies in the area, but also like linking with some funding, other funding opportunities. So it's very at all level, and that will help you increase your impact, but also increasing coherence at the geographical scale. And like I said, it's very important to look for risks, but beyond your site as well, because you're all interconnected. So look at the risks that are outside the project areas, like upstream land use or climate threats. And once you identify that, you will be invited to build strategies to better manage these risks, because again, it's a lot about interconnectivities. Some key guiding question for this criterion and about the scale challenge could be, are your interaction identified between the economy, society, and ecosystem? Is there any complementarity intervention identified in and around the area we are intend to work? Is the design of the NbS integrated with relevant complementary intervention? So that's some example of guiding question, but as we will see shortly, there is like plenty of guiding question like that already embedded into the guiding document or the self-assessment tool. Next slide, please. So criterion 3. The criterion 3 is also very important. We covered a little bit the socioeconomic outcome through the societal challenges, but to qualify it as NbS, as a reminder, you also need to identify what will be your biodiversity benefits and outcomes. So this criterion 3 is really about nature-based solutions should leave the ecosystem better off, healthier, more connected, and more resilient than before your intervention. Again, same process to follow, that's very important. Know your environment. You need to assess your ecosystem status. You can use both local, but also scientific knowledge to assess the health of your current ecosystem and what's damaging it. You need to understand the source of the damage, so the issue itself, to better define what should be the solution. You also need to set what your goal will be on the medium and long term. What do you want to achieve? And how can we track this progress? And that can be done by defining clear targets. For example, having more native species planted in an area, more restored area, a number of invasive species that have to be eradicated. All this type of indicator which help you assess your biodiversity outcome. Here also, you need to think of what will be good, what you will address, what you will fix, but also what can be the side effect of your intervention. Sometimes some activities can have some unexpected side effect for the environment as well, and that needs to be taken into account. And again, I was mentioning earlier that it's a lot about connectivity. So you need to go beyond fixing your own damage, but also increase connectivity, because we know that a lot of the ecosystem are fragmented, and the idea is to better connect these fragmented habitats. Here also some key guiding questions that you can ask yourself is to know if the current state of relevant ecosystem are assessed. Is this assessment at the appropriate spatial and temporal scale? Is a monitoring and assessment plan in place for the ecosystem, species, or the ecological process that you are looking into? Next slide, please. Okay, this one is about, it's important and difficult. We know that's often a criterion that for which users have encounter some issue, and for them, which is one of the most challenging because it requires resources. It's about the economic viability of your intervention. NbS, your nature-based solution, ideally should be affordable. It should bring long-term benefits and make smart use of your funding and resources. So first of all, it's again about identification, who pays and who benefits. You need to list all the costs, but also all the benefits of the nature-based solution, and make sure that it's clear to all stakeholders, everyone contributing, but also everyone gaining, so that you've got a clear and transparent visibility about the economic aspect of your NbS. And it helps also compare the cost and the value of your NbS with other solutions, which can be often more traditional infrastructure or gray engineered solution. And you often realize that on a long-term run, nature-based solutions are economically viable. But I reckon that this criterion might be a little bit resource intensive, and very you need some very skilled resources to assess that. But as long as you can, that will be a great tool and information for you to increase the buy-in, specifically from decision makers or donors, to invest in this nature-based solution rather than investing in some more gray infrastructure engineered solution or less nature intervention. Of course, that's what I was saying. You need to compare the alternative, whether your NbS is the best option relative to hybrid solution or engineers. It's exactly what I say. Some question is that really is to understand what are the direct and indirect benefits and what are the costs associated with your intervention and who will receive the main benefits at the end of your intervention. Next slide, please. So next one is about inclusive governance. To be sustainable and relevant, your nature-based solution must involve fair but also respectful decision-making where all voices are heard and people can participate meaningfully. When I say all voices, it's really everyone involved, from the communities, who are usually the actors and the main beneficiaries, all the way up to national government level as well. And that's very, very important to ensure that you got a wide buy-in from all persons involved in the project. So you invited to establish what we call a grievance mechanism, set up a process for resolving any conflict or addressing concern. It's a lot about discussing, sharing, ensuring also fair participation, thinking also about the gender equity, disability, social inclusion, but not only, also making sure that, again, the indigenous groups are involved and everyone has a voice to share in the decision-making process. Make sure to engage everyone. And we also recommend, the standards recommend to document all this decision-making process to keep clear records of who was involved, who is involved, what are their views, and especially when you have disagreement, it is even more important because you can use that as a record for all the history, especially if you have newcomers stepping in. So ask yourself, is there a legitimate feedback and grievance mechanism already in place, or are we planning to have one? Are indigenous people impacted? If yes, how? Does the intervention uphold the rights of indigenous people to free, prior, and informed consents? Is there impact and interest in the intervention map, or are decision-making process documented? So that's the type of question the standards equip you with. Next slide, please. Still have a little bit of time. So the criterion 6 is to make sure that when you gain something, you don't lose something else. And it's especially for people or nature that might be affected. It can be about trade-off between tourism development and conservation, for example, urbanization and watershed catchment protection or restoration. So you have to take a decision, and it's important when you start thinking about your nature-based solution to consider all these trade-offs. You need to identify what these trade-offs are. You need to discuss that openly with all persons involved, as we've seen as part of the previous criterion. And we need to identify what are the potential conflicts between benefits. Of course, very important in our region is to respect land, resource, and user right. We need to understand and honor people's right to land and resources, which might take a little bit of time for projects to be developed. And you may need to take that into account into your work plan. And again, it's about assessing, reviewing, monitoring regularly. And so you encourage to keep track of how well the NbS is balancing between the different interests and benefits of the people or actors involved in your area. Next slide, please, Rakeshni. Criterion 7, adaptive management. So your NbS should be monitored regularly. That's exactly what I was talking about, and adjusted as needed based on what's working and what's not. It's about adjustment. You need to adapt your project. We know it's not always like a straight line where I mean, everything goes as planned. We know that that would be ideal, but unfortunately, that's not the reality. And so you need to make sure that even if you start with your clear plan, you need to monitor your result and you need to adapt if needed at any point in time during your project implementation to make sure that it's still relevant to your context and that you will still be able to achieve the expected outcome. And I insist on the fact that this adaptive management and the monitoring and evaluation require some skills. And that's why we will have like a session dedicated on monitoring and evaluation on webinar 7, if I'm right. Next slide, please. And the last one, quite important, it's about ensuring sustainability and mainstreaming into policy. Mainstreaming will be the topic of the next webinar, so I'm not going to get into detail there, but basically this criterion is about ensuring that NbS can be sustained on a long-term run, but also integrated within policies and strategies. So that you need to share basically your lesson. That's very important, sharing lesson learned so that people, especially decision maker, can assess the benefit of this intervention and can better mainstream them within their policy, but also advocate for them in the future. Of course, you will be requested to and encouraged to align your activities and link them with existing policy, whether they are international commitment, regional strategies, or national plan. So I will stop that for the criterion. As you can see, it's pretty dense, and the idea is really to look at all the aspects of your nature-based solution, from policy level to monitoring, socioeconomic output, biodiversity, environmental benefit, the governance itself, the scale of your intervention, risk management. So the way I see this standard is for you to provide a framework, even if you don't use them very accurately and applying each of the criterion with each of the 28 sub-indicators, which might be time-consuming. We encourage you really to take them into account, to consider them as much as possible, and ideally to embed them into your day-to-day activities again. So have a look at these resources, become familiar with it, ask yourself the question about the NbS that you know or you are involved in, if these activities are aligned with these standards, what can be improved, what has been done very well and can be shared with others as well. That's what it is about today, because again, it's time consuming and can be difficult to assess. Next slide, please, Rakeshni. I think I will share my screen if I'm remembering well. Yeah, I would like just to share my screen now to show you some how the self-assessment tool is designed, and then I will finish on some pros and cons about using these standards. So let me share the screen. So as I say, the self-assessment tool can be found online on the IUCN website, or can be also used through the Excel sheets that I'm sharing right now. So now you should be able to see my screen. So the way it's organized is that you've got, first of all, a tab, multiple tab on the bottom. The first one is about instruction, how to use this self-assessment tool. As I said, we have standards, we have guidance, but this tool is to help you to assess your intervention, your nature-based solution using the standards. You've got an indicator guidance table, which summarizes all the criteria, all indicators, provide some guiding questions that are already shared with you. Some of them I shared with you during the presentation, and a rating system, which rates from strong to insufficient, adequate and partial as well, and give you some guiding or some example of what you need, what needs to be done to score strong, adequate, partial, or insufficient. That's a summary tab, but then you have also a criterion tab. So each tab is specific to a specific criterion. And if we look, for example, as a criterion 1 about societal challenges, so you've got one of the indicators. For this one, we have 3 indicators. And you've got the guiding question. Are new societal challenges identified? Are right holders and beneficiaries consulted? Are the most pressing societal challenge for right holders and beneficiaries prioritized? That gives you what you need to consider to be able to move to the rating. And if your project has identified and prioritized most pressing societal challenge based on full consultation with all stakeholders, then you're more than okay to score this indicator as strong by using the options here. But if your consultation process, for example, has been partial, then your rating will go down to adequate. If there is no societal challenges identified or no consultation conducted, then of course, this indicator will be insufficient, and so on. So that's how you're supposed to use this tool. And you can go ahead for each of the tab, for each of the criteria. So you need to go through 28 set of questions if you want to fully use the standards. And then the good thing is that you've got an overview tab at the end, which summarizes a little bit your assessment using color coding based on your rating. And even this diagram here, which shows, this is just an example, but shows like some weakness or strength of your project. In this example, the inclusive governance, adaptive management, sustainability and mainstreaming, and biodiversity net gain are quite good. But we can see that the balance of trade-off, the economic feasibility are some gaps that are not addressed at all. And so you know that you need to better work on this aspect. So to finish, and I think I'm still on time shortly, I would like just to go through my last tab, which summarizes a little bit our experience using the self-assessment tool and the standards. In terms of pro, we see that as I introduce the standards, it's a great and robust communication and monitoring tool for partners and donors to show that because you use the standards, you comply with them, your intervention is well aligned with the highest standards available. It guides you also, it guides the on-the-ground implementation, provide you good clarity and precision of what your nature-based solution activity entails, and also to identify what are the gaps. It works on evidence-based, so it's really factual. You've got some detailed guiding questions, which might be confusing sometimes, but at least they are there to guide you. And this self-assessment tool makes also project comparison quite easy in terms in case you are involved in multiple projects. In terms of cons, we found that this standard and self-assessment tool can be somehow difficult to use for some external stakeholders or partners which are not very experienced with NbS. It is very time consuming to assess your project using the self-assessment tool. And it is even more if you're not doing it from the beginning. Even if there is some guiding questions, some of the guiding questions can be a bit confusing, specifically on the difference from a rating to another for the same set of indicators. And we know also the challenge we advocate for monitoring the activities and the biodiversity outcome specifically, but we know that we need to have, it needs to be linked with a well-designed framework and some availability of resources. And also we try to adapt to use this self-assessment tool for some regional project, and we found it like very challenging. And as it is today, it is more suitable for national type of project and activities. I stop there. I hope I'm still on time, Rakeshni, and I didn't go too much over, but that's it. Thank you from my end, and feel free to ask any question. We will have like also speakers who will provide some feedback, more practical feedback on how they use or adapt the standard. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Ludwig, for the comprehensive overview of IUCN's Global Standard. And to the participants, as a pre-webinar resource, we have shared the self-assessment tool, the standards and guideline. And we will also share that again with the post-webinar resources. While global standards are very critical, local context is also very important. And Vinay from IUCN will now share how we are tailoring these tools to respect specific traditions, knowledge, and ecosystems. So now I would like to invite Vinay as a next speaker to take the floor. Thank you.
Maybe you can share the presentation yourself. Okay, please. Vinny has some issue. Oh, seems to work.
Okay. Yep. I'm sure you can see my screen, yeah?
Yes, we can, Vinay, and Rakesh, you're muted. Thank you.
I want to just swap this. Yeah. So present. Yep. Too easy. Anyways, thank you so much, colleagues, for joining us, friends. I would like to continue from where Ludovic left. I know it's been a challenging one that we have presented. However, I'll try to keep it very simple, as simple as possible. And it's very difficult to comprehend global standards within 20 minutes, 30 minutes. No, there are sessions, there are tailored dedicated sessions for one to become well acquainted with the standards. And if people would like to know more, we're more than happy to provide much more in-depth and detailed versions of the standard. However, this session is just an introductory to what is out there and what we in the Pacific is trying to work towards. Having a bit of an issue with my PC for some bizarre reason. Anyways, oops. Thank you. Yeah. So as we all know that nature-based solutions are becoming or forming part of a bigger picture within the Pacific and all that we do within the Oceania region. We have also talked about from the first webinar and moving forward that NbS or nature-based solutions provide a much more holistic strategy and leverages natural processes and ecosystems. Well, what we have also seen is that this approach of NbS is quite significant in the region. And the Pacific region is renowned for its rich biodiversity. We have very unique cultural landscapes and an environment that is increasingly vulnerable to not just dual, but rather several threats of climate and disasters. And we have seen that the standards, the global standard that has been developed, is to somewhat reflective of the realities on the ground, but to a very large extent, it is not. And I can be very critical at times because the projects that we work with do happen to meet those criteria 1 to criteria 8 and several other criterions or indicators. But we see that we happen to have a different twist to the work that to the NbS or our version of NbS in the Pacific. So basing this in mind, we thought to contextualize the global standard in a much more the Pacific way, our cultural context, our traditional ways of doing things. We have one of the very unique landscapes within the region and several other parts of the world. So we thought this, with this thought in mind, we are currently working on a Pacific version of the IUCN Global Standard. And the very basic question is, why do we need a Pacific guidance? Well, the potential of NbS is often, first and foremost, it's largely undermined, and challenges of lack of integrated approaches that fully leverage the environmental and social benefits. By this, what I mean is the Pacific way of life. When we talk about adaptation priorities and projects, we largely talk about grey infrastructure, bridges, roads. We talk about infrastructure that is very that starts providing us with benefits straightforward. Seawalls. We do not think about a green element. So we have also seen, or often seen, that NbS within the region is often undermined. There's, as alluded to earlier, the Pacific region is very rich in ecosystem, and there are several climatic conditions and disaster. So we have seen that the diversity demands that NbS to be specifically tailored to local context. Although we can have a generic version, but within the work that we are doing, we are bringing in a much more specific, tailored, local version of NbS. There's also a huge gap in approaches that harmonize environmental restoration with community development. What we see is that there is a critical need for strategies that are restorative and inclusive of the traditional knowledge, the TEK, the indigenous, from an indigenous lens, at the same time looking into diverse and very, let's say, continuous systems. We have also seen, and this is very evident, and most of you can comprehend what I'm saying here, there's a growing interest in the investment of NbS. However, we have seen or we expose ourselves to risk of duplicating, which is called a cookie cutter situation. What this means is one size fits all. So if we see a community planting mangroves, we see the same being replicated, although we want to have an element of scale or scalability, but we want the right scale. We want the specific context scale of a successful intervention, not just one size fits all. If it works one place, it should work for the other. There is currently the scenario that we see. If one country is developing NbS seawalls, then we want to have the same version of a seawall being built in other regions. What we are trying to propose here with the contextualized specific version is get away with the one size fits all situation. It has to be tailored, specific to local context, with successful interventions that work. And other places, although there could be success interventions involved, but we need a slight twist, a slight modified variant of version. Who are our target audience for this? Well, we are the committee or the team behind this is looking into a much more wider use for one stakeholders at pretty much every scale. We're looking at small grant initiatives to large scale regional projects. It is intended for government agencies, local communities, NGOs, and local level governments. We are also working within the peripheries of empowering practitioners to plan, implement, and manage NbS initiatives in the Pacific. As I've said, we're looking into some of the most important frameworks is tailored Pacific environments. We want to strengthen integration of indigenous governance. We have seen that indigenous governance can be varied. Fiji would have a different governance system. Tonga will have a slightly different variant of the governance system. And we trying to make this as a much more coherent and context specific as possible. We also want to enhance funding access and project design. For example, when we talk about, let's say, the Kiwa initiative, Kiwa right now is seen as one of the largest nature-based solutions interventions in the Pacific. We also have, in collaboration with Asian Development Bank and IUCN, we have something called the the NbS hub, a modality behind funding nature-based solutions projects. We have seen the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, and the likes of several others are ramping up investments into NbS. So aligning your projects into something which is globally recognized, for example, the IUCN Global Standard, gives your project credibility, and the donors or the funders also strength, I would say, into your projects. And bringing this a much more specific contextualized version of the project provides that unique Pacific cultural context. And at the same time, we want to ensure a long-term sustainability of NbS projects by embedding community-driven approaches. And I'm glad to see, and I'm glad to share that most of the colleagues who have joined us, the very few are already part of this specific NbS guidance amongst us. This is a two-pronged approach without going into much more or overwhelming you with so much information. Keeping it very simple, it's a two-pronged approach. One is a specific contextualized version of the IUCN Global Standard. And two is a very simple, practical, web-based tool for practitioners, governments, and everyone to access. So what the second element is going to show you how to plan projects, what are some of the stresses of the environment systems, what are some of the interventions that work in many places, what are some of the ways in which traditional knowledge has been embedded, and monitoring and evaluation plans. This is something which is very simple to access and will provide a much more larger, I would say, deeper context in how we design projects, or even how the local community could design projects, how the implementers of government organizations and entities can design projects. We have a steering committee. A steering committee member has been formed with practitioners from the Pacific region. These are equally distributed to have equal representation from the Pacific. That includes Polynesia, Melanesia, and Micronesia region, to ensure we have inclusivity and regional representation. At the same time, this is Pacific-led. Some of the key development phases includes consultations, drafting, and at the same time, we will have a validation workshop. Where are we as we speak, as I speak, where are we? We have already formed the steering committee. We have, we are halfway through the stage one, a Pacific contextualized version. The steering committee members of the steering committee group that comprises of 12 experts from the region meet every fortnightly. There are two, again, prongs of written submissions, at the same time face-to-face workshop type interventions, workshop type discussions to discuss the challenges, the gaps, the inclusion of a Pacific context within the IUCN Global Standard. What are some of the next steps in finalization? Well, we are finalizing the guidance documents through a continued consultation. Now, this is something that is not going to be one-off. It's going to be a live document. We provide the steering committee members coming to provide the consultations, and then there's going to be a finalized version that can be within circulation after final validation workshops for the wider Pacific to guide. There's also an implementation strategy for widespread adoption in the region. How do we do this? Well, it's in versions like this, where we meet or through virtual interventions. We also have a regional coordination mechanism called the Pacific Islands Roundtable, and we have a large number of members. And of course, most of you who are in this webinar today will also form part of the Pacific Islands Roundtable NbS Technical Working Group. Furthermore, when we go into country validations, when we go into countries, we have face-to-face interventions. I see Jacinta's hand is up. Something wrong?
Yes, sorry. Sorry about that, Vinay. But we are running short on time, so requesting if you could spin it up a bit. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you so much, guys. It's been a lovely, wonderful session having you all. Anyways, this is my last slide. So as I've said, this is what we're looking into, is implementation strategies, the expected outcomes, and we are more than happy to provide a similar version or a similar virtual workshops intervention once we have once we are in the very final stages of concluding the guidance. Thanks so much, guys. Laka.
Thank you so much, Vinay, for a very comprehensive and presentation tailored to the needs of the Pacific Islands. So the next session on our program is the Q&A session. So if you have any questions for the first two speakers, Ludwig and Vinay, if you have any clarification, if anything was not clear, please you could unmute and ask the questions now, or you can just write it in the chat box and we'll get back to you for the questions. And while we are waiting for your questions, we want to have a brief photo session for this webinar. And I would give the floor to Jacinta. Please write the questions if you have any, or feel free to unmute and ask the question to the technical group.
Hello, everyone. Requesting if everyone can turn on their...
You muted, Jacinta.
Participants. So can we have big smiles? So I'll take rapid shots because there are a lot of people and I need to get everyone in one frame. Okay. So can I get a big smile, please? Okay. Another one. Big smiles. Okay. Big smiles. Smiles. Almost done. Okay. And we are done. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jacinta. Now we have a question for Ludwig from Harsha. Can you give examples of long-term nature-based solutions that has been incorporated in policies in the Pacific, perhaps Fiji?
Yes, I mean, I don't have like specific cases in mind right now, especially in Fiji.
Ludo, you are unmuted.
Oh, is it okay now?
Yes.
Yeah. I think Vinay, you worked with the hybrid NbS seawall, and that's something that has been embedded into some policies. The idea behind these indicators is really because we tend to see that decision makers still tend to believe that like green infrastructure or engineered solutions are often more suitable, more cost efficient than nature-based solution just because of the lack of awareness or cost-benefit analysis, for example, of nature-based solution. And the idea behind it is really like to promote this successful story to decision maker as well for them to understand the benefit of it. When it comes to like practical example in Fiji, Vinay, you were part of some ministry in Fiji, so maybe you have like some specific answer to that if you could just step in with that specifically for Fiji. You know even more the context than I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I can provide in a bit of a context here. Now, when we work in the environmental development sector, we always tend to be quite bloated or loaded with a lot of acronyms. So before NbS used to be EBA or ecosystem-based adaptation, and we largely use that as well. Now, in Fiji, as well as in the region, the implementation of or the uptake of NbS and EBA is well documented, largely documented. For example, national adaptation plans talk about this. We have national biodiversity strategy and action plans, NBSAPs, EIA guidelines. They all talk about this, but in a different context, or maybe in a way that does comprehend this, but not in actual wordings. For example, NbS or EBA. Now, if I wear my previous hat within Fijian government, yes, we did implement quite a lot of NbS interventions. Now, one of the most well-documented projects from the Ministry of Agriculture includes the Ministry of Waterways, sorry, and Agriculture includes the NbS seawalls. Now, there is one example. There are several other examples that includes climate smart agriculture, riparian buffer zones, riverbank protection works, all includes NbS, including gravity-fed water retention systems. There are several projects that has been implemented. There are currently being implemented, and there are several other funding modalities behind it that comes through to implement a lot more NbS projects. Now, coming back to this particular webinar, the Promoting Pacific Islands Nature-Based Solution, or the PIPIN project, specifically tasked to do just that, which is to incorporate NbS into existing policies, not just in Fiji, but in the Pacific region through regional mechanisms as well as national mechanisms. What we have seen is we do not want NbS, a standalone NbS policy. No, we don't want this. There are several ministries cross-cutting rather than just looking into environment ministries. We want to scale this up within infrastructure, tourism, gender, Gen Z, women, at the same time, roads, water systems. NbS can be largely incorporated within a lot more ministries, including the finance ministries. Huh? And I think somebody, Georgia did put in a link. There's a compilation of NbS approaches and projects that is also done by WCS, I think, by the Kappa initiative, and you can find a lot of NbS interventions within the region. Thank you.
And if I may just complement to that, and that will be covered during the next webinar, which will be about mainstreaming, but to complement exactly what you say, Vinay, is that we can see that there is a gap between like international regional commitment and national commitment, where usually NbS as such is recognized and mainstream within these international and regional strategies, but there is still some gap within the national policies, where at the best, EBA are recognized, but which is just a sub-concept of nature-based solution, but the overall NbS concept still need to be like more mainstream within national policy. So we're getting there, but that's also the responsibility of any project on the ground to do their part, basically to promote that as well. But we'll get that into detail in the next webinar. Thank you for the question, and thank you, Vinay.
Thank you so much, Ludwig and Vinay. And like Ludwig mentioned, more detail would be on the next webinar on mainstreaming NbS into policies, and that is webinar 3. And thank you for your question, and thanks, Georgia, for sharing the project. So now we'll move on to our next session. And if you have any question, please feel free to put it on the chat box, and we'll get back to you. So our next session is breakout session. So we will divide you into groups, and then in this group you can work with in collaboration with the members in the group. There would be 4 to 5 members, and you'll be given 15 minutes to work on this group work, and after 15 minutes you will return to the main room, and you will share what you have collected or discussed within the group with the team. So as you can see, Jacinta has just shared the questions that we have for this session. So these are 3 simple questions. Which of the NbS criteria do you think is the most important, and why? And so out of the 8 criteria that was listed by Ludwig, which one do you think matters the most and why? Please put it in your own Pacific context, and why do you think that? So just select one criteria in the group, and then you discuss why do you think that matters. And the next question is, what is one thing that still feels unclear or challenging? Since you are introduced with the criteria, where do you think more explanation is needed? You can also note that down. And finally, how do you think the standards being useful in your country or sector or the field of work that you do? So do you think this could help the project that you do, your country or the community? So these are the 3 questions, and you'll be given 15 minutes to work in your group, and then you'll come back after 15 minutes and just briefly in 2 minutes present whatever you have collected with the team. So those are the questions. We'll also put the question in the chat box. So very soon you'll be allocated in your groups, please join the groups.
इसमें मंगो शेयर करो questions.
Hello again, everyone. So the first question is like, which of the NbS standard criteria do you think is the most important and why? That is the first question.
Hi, maybe if I go first, I wanted you to say something about first question. Which of the NbS standards criteria do you think
I didn't get the second question. I don't. Can anyone share? What do you think of that question?
Hi, so the first question was which of the NbS standard criteria do you think is the most important and why? That was the first question. Second one was what is one thing that still feels unclear or challenging when the criteria was discussed? Like which one do you need more explanation? And the third one, how do you see these standards being useful in your own country, sector, or field of work?
Yeah, Anthony.
Only 1 point.
Okay.
1 point could be the importance of community involvement.
Yeah.
Hello, all good with this group?
Hi, Rakeshni. Yeah. Yeah, we're looking at criteria 8.
Yeah, just a simple discussion. I know the global standard was just introduced a while ago. So just a feel of like which of the standards criteria do you think is most important and why? Few points on that. And what is one thing that is still unclear looking at the whole criteria? You think more clarity looking at the specific perception? So these are some of the things that you can just discuss, just select a member that can present when going back to the main group. So do you have any questions? So you're okay with these questions?
And what was question 3?
Come again?
And what was question 3?
Can I add in
I actually cannot hear you.
You're gonna have to speak louder because we can't really hear what you're saying.
NbS? So, NbS came into my notice. Like I noticed about NbS when we started doing some.
So you are clear with the questions, this group?
Some of our projects just about.
Rakeshni,
Yes.
what was question 3?
Okay. Question 3 was,
Question 3.
how do you see these standards being useful in your own country, sector, or field of work? How do you see the standards? Is it applicable or useful for NbS projects you're involved in or you know of? How do you see this criteria? What is the feel of these global standards?
If I may, I think these the standards that's been given.
Okay. Hi, Rakeshni. Sorry, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. Susan, which group were you in? So I assign you back.
I was with Amasani and Herbarium.
Thank you, Delzil. Would anyone like to add on to that?
Let me check which group Anasini is. Anasini and who all?
And Herbarium?
Oh, okay. So because there were only 2 of you, so it was reassigned by Zoom. So I'll just put you in another group. That's okay with you?
Yeah, that's fine. It's just because I was cut off with the internet. I had to
Oh, okay.
try and get in again.
Okay, I'll just try to put you with where I have any ideas. Okay, I'm putting you in room 8.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Don't worry about me, Rakeshni. I'm actually eating dinner right now since we're running a little bit late, and I have a commitment right after. I'm taking the opportunity to eat real quick.
It's okay, you can relax.
First, want to learn about HB solutions, and how we like the meetings and the project presentations, and then I had the opportunity to see a workshop last year where, like, SPEC, IUCN, SBC, the partners were there. It's really nice to see about the work and they were presenting the assessment they did for their SPEC specific projects. And yeah, I can really tend to learn more about what the mechanisms of these projects developing NbS are very high cost, like big project funds, and then you have those that are actually smaller projects that are in a smaller, get smaller amount of funding, which is really the cost effective side.
Yes.
A quick question. Sorry, I'm aware that we're nearly done, but the ASEAN mentioned it, question number 2. Was there any consideration of the contribution sectors for with regards to climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction that was done before? That was just the fact that I was still unclear with all the the solutions stated at NbS. Was there any contribution sectors that think all the solutions that they NbS presented in May?
So sorry, yeah, health ownerships. Back to base.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I welcome you back to the main session again. And I hope you had some very fruitful discussion within your group. So without further ado, I will invite some groups to present what you have just discussed. If anyone can just, I hope one of you from the group can just share what you have discussed. If you want to share the screen or just go over the points. So feel free to do that. Anyone wants to go before we start? If I select the groups that can present.
Sure, I'm happy to start for our group.
Sure, Georgia.
We had a really great discussion. All the team members within our group decided that criteria 1 was the most important of the NbS criteria because understanding the societal challenge is just this key starting point that you cannot design an NbS if you haven't really got the data and information that you need to really define the societal challenge. We also had a good discussion around the challenge of applying the standards. So one really interesting point was that in the Pacific, traditional or customary land and sea governance is such a critical element of nature-based solutions, and that they've found this is a project developer, difficult to kind of align with the standards with customary practice and Indigenous knowledge. So that was another really helpful insight. That's it.
Thank you so much, Georgia. Anyone else want to go next for the presentation? Want to share what your group have discussed? Yes, Peters too, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, look, our group we weren't that chatty, but we did have a bit of a discussion around it, and I came late to the meeting, so I was nominated to present. So if my group feels that they need to add anything in, by all means. But we thought that of the standards that have been presented, pretty much those standards were relevant for doing any sort of project. It's not necessarily doing any sort of activity. You need to understand what, and as Georgia said, it's very important to understand what the societal challenges are. And I think our group certainly agreed on that. But, you know, economic viability, inclusive and transparent, you know, adaptively managed and sustainable mainstream, I think are all criteria which are useful for any project and, you know, or intervention that's going on. And that's what we sort of talked about. One that we thought was specifically relevant for NbS was probably the net gain to biodiversity. That was something which from a NbS point of view is how you would look to try and deliver on that. So that's something which we sort of highlighted as an area, but we'd also had identified certainly, as Georgia said, the sort of, societal challenges on there. In terms of what was unclear or challenging, we weren't quite sure exactly in regards to the design of NbS informed by scale was one of the areas that we wanted to get a little bit more information around. And also my query, which is probably not just on the standards, but just a general query is, and again, because I came late, I might have missed this, but where NbS, the definition of it, or in terms of how it's being considered, where you might apply or you utilize natural resources and you, I'm not going to say exploit, but develop those natural resources for addressing a societal challenge. And I'd work in the water security space and water and sanitation, and we do a lot of work in groundwater. And so, I'm just sort of checking in with the group, is the groundwater, which is a natural resource, which is which is being used to support societal challenges or address societal challenges, but requires specific interventions like drilling and so on like that to actually make use of it. It was sort of wondering, just to get advice from the group, if that is still considered like the use of that natural resource as a nature-based solution, but yet you're using engineering approaches to address that. So that was something which I'm just adding in from myself at this stage. But so thank you, unless my group had something else to add.
Thank you so much. And whatever you have said is very important. And like you said, this platform will have the discussion going and we'll get back to you on that. Thank you so much. So looking at the time that we have, so I'll just try to take the last group, which has Harsha and Trevor. If you could just share your whatever you discuss with the participants.
Hi everyone, this is Harshna. Trevor, do you want to also, please feel free to add on to what I'm saying. So in my group, I had Trevor and Sekilini. So we were looking at the criterion and talking about which one would be the most important one. And me included, I also said societal, and my other team members, they had other ideas. One said informed by scale. And that got us thinking it's dependent on the community that you live in, that the criterion, the most important one it's not the same for each community. So it's dependent on the community because we all come from different societies. So that's why we're saying, okay, maybe criterion one is more important to us. Of course, societal challenges, most of the time we tend to put the community at the heart, but other criterions might be equally important. So it's community dependent in terms of the importance of the criterion. The second question was on what still feels unclear. So if you look at all the criterion, there can be cross-sectoral relationship. And because of that, we were very unclear whether we would be allowed to have that. For example, if you see criterion 3, 4, and 8, they can, be cross-sectoral. So you could have ecotourism being part of that. And so we don't know if something like that is allowed to happen or not. I think, Trevor, please feel free to jump in if I've missed something. So we only managed to discuss 2 of those questions.
Thank you, Harshna. I think you summarized everything very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Group 12, Harsha, Sikeli, and Trevor. So thank you so much for this participation. Sorry, because we do not have time to go over all the groups, but the purpose of the group was to work in collaboration, networking, and discuss each other, and we can have the discussion going on this NbS. So without further ado, I'd like to move to the next session. So even the best standard needs a very robust monitoring and evaluation. So Georgia will show how to track success while staying flexible in the Pacific context. So I'd like to give the floor to Georgia as our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rakeshni. And I'd also like to thank Ludo and Vinay for their presentations. I think that my sharing today will hopefully complement nicely the work they've already done. So for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to speak about the work that WWF Australia, that where I work, has done to adapt the IUCN NbS standards to use them for a monitoring, evaluation, and learning tool within our program. So my brief presentation will provide a little context about the program that I work on. I'll give you a short overview of the adapted NbS review tool that we developed and why we developed it, and the process that we used with our partners to go through that tool together. I'll provide a brief example of a project and sort of the final scores and that demonstrates how that tool is used in practice. Then a couple of examples of lessons that we learned across the portfolio by using this tool. A little bit of partner feedback on the tool, where they found value, how long it took them to go through the tool, where they found it to be challenging, and then from our program perspective, sort of a what next. Cool. So the program I work on is called Climate Resilient by Nature. It's a $21.5 million DFAT funded program in the Pacific and Southeast Asia. You can see the countries where we have projects that are being implemented. There are 9 ongoing NbS projects implemented by different NGO partners. And so far, each of these projects have run for 2.5 years. So we have some nice lessons coming from them now. Each project is unique. They're focused on different ecosystems and they take their own approaches to monitoring and evaluation. So what we decided to do at the 2-year mark was develop an NbS review tool that's based on the IUCN tool, but we wanted to make it more simple. So we wanted our tool to take just about 3 hours for a project team to complete. We really wanted it to be like a minimum viable product NbS review tool that identifies key criteria for a high integrity community-led nature-based solutions. And the process that was taken was our partner, our implementation partner, completed the tool by themselves through an internal review and scoring. We then met together with them and did a joint review and agreed on a final score against each of these criteria. We kept core features of the IUCN tool, so you'll be able to see some real similarities between the criteria, for example. We, of course, have a criteria on nature, benefits to nature, or ecosystems, which in the IUCN tool would be that biodiversity criteria. It has a criteria on benefits to people and communities, so the NbS must deliver livelihoods benefits. We actually added a criteria on climate that is not in the IUCN tool, but we believe that there must be climate adaptation or mitigation benefits from the NbS. We did cut some criteria that we felt were not super relevant to our program portfolio. We assessed would take a really long time and blow out that sort of 3-hour goal, or we adapted them a little to be more relevant to the projects in our portfolio. So I think this kind of shows as well that the NbS criteria, where I think the tool is very comprehensive, super comprehensive as it stands, I think there is some space to be flexible and adapt it to your needs. So, for example, we actually cut the cost benefit criteria and replaced it with this criteria number 4, where we asked for an assessment of whether there's a logical connection between outcomes for people, nature, and climate. We've found through kind of the looking at each of the NbS within the program that for an NbS to be successful, there needs to be a clear and logical connection between socioeconomic improvements, livelihood improvements, and the incentives for ecosystem conservation or restoration. So that's just an example of one of the changes that we made. And you can see the full set of criteria that we decided on for our version of that tool. Now, the next slide I'll show you is the actual scores of one of the projects. It looks quite similar to the radar sort of chart that Ludo showed earlier as part of the IUCN tool. And in this particular project, what's happening with this NbS is communities and nature are benefiting, they have evidence to demonstrate benefits for both communities and nature from the sustainable management of a marine resource that communities in this project rely on for income and food security. And they actually have some good data to show that the health and abundance of this particular marine resource is improving. So you can see they've given themselves a score of 3.5 around benefits to nature out of 5. Sorry, all of these scores are out of 5. I actually think they could have been a bit more generous to themselves because they do have some good data on the ecosystem health, but they felt that they actually need to improve the way and enhance the way that they're monitoring their ecosystem and get broader data around reef health in the area as well and mangrove health as well. So that's why they gave themselves a 3.5. This project has done, you notice they've given themselves a score of 5 on that logical connection criteria. And in this project, they've done heaps of work to link the resource management approach with the livelihood approach in the communities, such that communities now are really committed to this nature-based solution. And that was evidenced through some key informant interview data that they've shared. So that's why they scored this area really highly. You can see they've scored only a 2 out of 5 on sustainability and scale. They said what they need to do is look at the landscape level threats to the ecosystem they're seeking to protect. And so that's why they gave themselves a low score there. And also they're very early in the stage of a sort of nature positive business that they're developing from this marine resource. And that's an important piece of their sort of idea of sustainability. So they don't have much evidence to speak to on that. And that also is the reason for their sort of lower score there. Yeah, so that's an example from one project of using the tool. The next slide here is showing the scores across all of the nine projects that were assessed, and we found that the tool that is really useful because if you look across the whole portfolio, we can really learn from projects that have done really well or scored really highly on certain criteria. You look at, how did they do that? Why did they score themselves so highly? What can we learn from this project for the other projects within the portfolio? And just, really briefly, you can see that across the partners, if you look at the sort of average score and the ones that are sort of standing out as the weaknesses across the portfolio is around climate benefits. So basically, after 2 years of implementation, a number of the partners said they haven't really got evidence yet that climate adaptation outcomes have been achieved. So they had to score themselves low on that. Some also identified they need to improve their approach to measuring change in climate adaptation. So it was actually really useful to do this tool at the 2-year point. It's allowed us to work with the partners on their identified gaps, develop some sort of tailored technical assistance, and we're going to repeat this tool at the end of the program and see where has change happened for each of the partners. The other sort of area of weakness was around that logical connection. for people, nature and climate overall. Wasn't super strong across the portfolio. Partners shared in some cases that their actions to protect ecosystems were very strong, but livelihoods were still underdeveloped. And of course, without having both of those aspects of the NbS quite strong, it's impossible to create that connection. For other projects, partners reported that actually it takes a really long time to establish a conservation mindset and to create that linkage between the ecosystem protection and the livelihoods. So that's why they scored that area not very high. And you can see that the strengths across the portfolio lie in incorporating traditional and Indigenous knowledge into the nature-based solution, which is great, and also the organisation's approach to establishing, empowering and participatory governance of their NbS. So that's another use of this kind of tool. It really allows you to see strengths and weaknesses across a portfolio and at a project level. I'm going to wrap up shortly. I'll just really quickly share that partners were pretty positive about the tool. Comments such as, we love that it was split into nature people and looked at the linkages. A few partners were enthused about the idea of using it with communities, though did recognise it could be a bit reductive because using it to evaluate across an entire project, there's differences between communities. It took a bit longer than we expected partners to complete as well, so that's interesting, even though we really pared it back. Recognise I'm nearly out of time. Finally, this is my last slide, what's next? So based on that feedback from partners that it was a useful and standardized way to look at their nature-based solutions, we're going to further develop the NbS radar tool. So that's tool number 3. We're going to build on it and display dimensions of NbS with indicators to measure alignment. This tool will have 2 functions. We want to look at baseline patterns of projects that will really help identify the problem the NbS may seek to address, and then when you apply it again later in the project timeframe, we can make this comparison between baseline and endline patterns, show where changes have occurred over time, and that supports eventual attribution of project impact. So it becomes, you can really build it in and have it as your core MEL tool, I think, for nature-based solutions. We're also going to develop these other more kind of beginner sort of tools in a way. So we want to have like an NbS readiness check tool for users new to NbS to help organizations understand how to best commence NbS, what they need to do to be ready, and then this mainstreaming tool to help users scan for NbS mainstreaming opportunities in their existing projects. So we think they'll make an important contribution, and these will all be publicly available and simple to use. So yeah, please keep an eye on that, and if you're interested, reach out or sign up to our newsletter on the Climate Resilient by Nature website. So thanks very much. That's all from me, Rakeshni.
Thank you so much, Roja, for especially linking monitoring and evaluation to local data collection practices. So thank you so much. And now, as we know, theory meets practice. So we have our final speaker, Martin, who will share lessons from the ground, what works, what doesn't, and how NbS standards guided real world examples. So can we have so we'll give the floor to our final speaker, Martin.
Thank you, Rakeshni. Can you confirm you can see my slides?
Yes, we can, Martin.
Fantastic. All right. Well, first of all, thank you all for being here, for staying, although we're running a little bit over time. Thanks to Rakeshni and Ludo for inviting me and having me here. My name is Martin Romain. I am currently the project manager of the Kiwa Regional MICOS project. So today I'll be focusing on the MICOS project context and how the nature-based solution standards were central to its design, implementation, and monitoring. So throughout the story, I'll be sharing project partners' goals, some of the assumptions we made, the use of some of the standards in practice, and also some of the lessons learned. For a bit of context, as you may all know, or most of you know, for several decades, NPA have been established by local authorities and communities that wish to manage or protect particular areas or sites. Primarily was driven by biodiversity concerns, but also in some instances with some recognition that fishery management and food security were also important. And while successful in some locations, coastal fisheries continued to decline, resulting in critical shift towards a more holistic approach to fisheries management, inclusive but beyond NPAs. This is when the community-based fisheries management, or CBFM approach, including the locally managed marine resource area concepts, rose to prominence. You may be familiar with the Pacific Framework for Actions on Scaling Community-Based Fisheries Management, and you can see the framework document here on your right. Moving forward in 2020, the Kiwa Initiative, which is financed by the governments of Australia, New Zealand, Canada, France, and the EU, introduced the opportunity to support nature-based solutions approaches, particularly with a focus to target and address climate adaptation across the Pacific. Now, following this announcement of the Kiwa Initiative, several NGOs and government partners from 6 jurisdictions across Micronesia, that includes the Marshall Islands, Nauru, the Federalists of Micronesia, including Kosrae, Pohnpei, and Yap states, as well as Palau, came together as a collective of equals. They decided to design and participate in a regional project that explicitly aimed to strengthen community-based fisheries management and associated alternative livelihood that were aligning with the existing framework of the LMMA in the region, as well as recognizing the growing nature-based solution concept and body of work. What was interesting is that partners, when learning about NbS and CBFM particularly, realized that what they were doing on the ground, the interventions that they were actually undertaking with communities, could be considered nature-based solutions or could be considered community-based fisheries adaptation interventions. So while designing this project, the nature-based solution definition was used specifically in defining the project objective and deciding which interventions should be included and resourced in the project. Now, this was where it got a little bit interesting. While partners thought that most of their work could be classified as nature-based solutions, the definitions and standards help kind of clarify really what was or what was not a nature-based solution intervention in their portfolio. So in some instances, for example, partners realized that the interventions that they were already implementing or proposing was actually a great solution, like, for example, building a seawall to limit coastal erosion, instead of thinking about potentially an intervention that would be restoring the coastline via mangrove restoration. In other instances, their interventions could be considered nature-based solution, and that gave them an opportunity to think about how to improve that intervention, meaning consider some of the gaps, achieve potentially the same result faster or cheaper, or possibly also replicate it further, scaling it deeper or scaling it out. Now, after a couple of months of preparation, the MICOS project was born and focused specifically on 3 main areas of focus. First is strengthening the implementation of community-based fisheries management and alternative livelihood at site across 4 Micronesian nations. The second is enhancing regional capacity to assess and measure CBFM and NbS outcomes. And the last is to promote, share, and scale CBFM and nature-based solution through policy and knowledge exchange. You can see the project in number at the bottom of the slide. This is a project of about 5 million euros, started in about 2023 and is expected to end in 2026. It has an estimated number of beneficiaries of 70,000. So as you can see, the notions of CBFM and NbS were intentionally inserted in all of the project objectives. Now, upon implementation, as we started, we collaborated with SPC team, including Ludo, who spearheaded a project-wide self-assessment evaluation. Now, this effort was based on information included in the project document submitted to the Kiwa donors, which took into consideration the proposed activities, the interventions themselves across all jurisdictions among all partners. There was limited interactions with partners at the time, so it was mostly with the project management team. This is to give you an idea of the amount of detail that Ludo and his team were able to access. Now, as the evaluation was conducted, both the project team that I lead and SPC learned three main lessons. One is the balance between scale and depth, specifically completing a regional project level nature-based solution self-assessment. It was expedient, it was informative, and it provided a lot of broad perspective. Unfortunately, it did not fully capture the local contexts, the nuances, and the challenges of these local sites, local contexts. However, a site level assessment at that time was simply not an option. Although it would have provided with us with a very different perspective. Now, learning from this, we've decided to adopt what we call a hybrid strategy. Some of the specific nature-based solution indicators, for example, the ones related to policy development, awareness, and capacity building, should be best assessed at the national or regional level, particularly for the ones that have a project target at that scale. So we would consider keeping an assessment at that level for those indicators. While for other indicators, particularly related to on-the-ground implementation, we would, in this case, require a site-specific or intervention-specific evaluation. So we were hoping to switch and proceed with a hybrid approach. An example that you can see here is while the project was focusing specifically on strengthening the implementation of community-based fisheries management across the entire region, partners did actually tailor their CBFM approach to very specific jurisdictions, specific sites, specific communities that they are working with and supporting. You can see here, for example, in the RMI, they focused on enhancing and implementing existing atoll resource management plans, where in a place like Palau, they decided to expand statewide CBFM planning with a specific highlight and focus on enforcement and compliance. Now, in those circumstances, the nature-based solution self-assessment would be much more informative if applied at the site or jurisdictional level, where the unique characteristic of their CBFM approach can be better captured, evaluated, and utilized. A second lesson learned is that the initial plan for the MACOS project was to train communities in using the standard and the self-assessment tool. Now, following our first lessons learned and following the project-wide assessment being completed, we decided to adjust and switch our audience to train and implement partners instead. And this is because, as you've probably been exposed or are practitioners yourself, partners, as they lead and facilitate project interventions, they are well positioned to work with communities and provide a thoughtful assessment at a scale that they are comfortable with, that they can work with, and that is informative to the work that they do and the way they support their communities. Now, the last lessons learned for us in this regards, following the completion of this assessment, was that the initial assessment was critical for us to get some exposure on how to utilize it, to understand how it works, but also to learn from it and adjust. Adjust two things. One, for future project design, this will be taken into consideration. And second, we'll try to learn from this in the upcoming implementation of the project, since we still have about 2 years of implementation. There's a second element that I'd like to share with you in regards to the project implementation. It's specifically the use of the definition and the standards to make informed decisions, essentially promoting good practice as the project interventions were starting to roll out. And I'd like to use the example here of an intervention in Koshrai, in the Federation of Micronesia, where a rabbitfish aquaculture interventions were proposed, including increasing the number of existing cages, rather large cages, from 2 to 8. Now, while the interventions concept was approved once the project was submitted to the donor, the exact approach of the interventions was recently discussed on. It included deciding on the ownership, the operation, the maintenance of the cages, as well as the proposed use of the fish once they reach maturity, meaning, are they going to be selling them or are they going to be using them for consumption? Initially, the partner and the community members expected to compensate the individuals that are operating and maintaining the cages. And this would have resulted in making essentially the interventions capital intensive and capital dependent. So ultimately, this was not an option to be able to proceed in that fashion for this approach to be moving forward, especially if we were to look at criteria 4, which is economic viability. So instead, the partners and community came together and decided to reduce the size of the cages to be more manageable. They've agreed to organize themselves and each other in rotations to maintain and operate the cages and ensure that a small profit would be collected from the resale of the fish. And ideally, it would help with maintenance and sustaining the operation in the long term. Now, as you know by now, the MICOS project was designed as implemented with NbS concept in its foundation. Our second objective was specifically emphasizing building the capacity of practitioners and resource managers to help communities reflect and assess the effectiveness on their CBFM measures and refine them over time. This commitment is ongoing, is an ongoing improvement, specifically as we are now rolling out our mail strategy. It was defined and produced recently, and now we're finally rolling it out, which you'll find, as George had mentioned, is an important element. And there's important bridging between mail strategy and the nature-based solution self-assessment and standards. Now, looking ahead, just to finish here, our next steps focus on refining and strengthening how we integrate nature-based solutions within the project's CBFM approaches. First, we will be continuing to socialize the NbS standards and principles with all the project partners, ensuring a shared understanding and commitment. Second, we will support partners in conducting site-level assessments, which will help them evaluate, improve, and adapt their interventions. Another important element for us will be to align the nature-based solution self-assessment tool with the CBFM framework that I presented earlier. This will create a structured approach that is both practical and relevant for fisheries management, particularly at the reporting phase. And finally, we'll be facilitating structured discussion among resource managers, community members, and other stakeholders, ensuring that CBFM interventions are well designed, assessed, and continuously improved as comprehensive and responsive nature-based solutions. If some of you are interested in being part of those events, I'll be very happy to share my email. You can see here for you to reach out. Some of those will be done remotely and others in person. With all that, thank you very much for your attention. I'll be taking any questions.
Thank you so much, Martin, for the presentation. And if you have any questions for this session for Martin, Joja, and other speakers, you can write it in the chat box and we'll get back to you. Because of time constraints, we won't be able to take further questions now. So as you can see in the screen, Jacinta have shared the feedback link. If you could just scan the QR code, or you can go to the chat. It has a feedback link, and just give us feedback on that while we close up the session. So heartfelt thanks to all our speakers for the expertise and everyone here for making this session dynamic and very collaborative. I thank you for that. And the key takeaways that I see from this session is IUCN NbS standards must align with local traditions, ecosystems, and Pacific priorities. And the NbS self-assessment tool and adaptive monitoring and evaluation frameworks empower effective implementation. And as shown by Martin, real ground examples are still working with the standards now. So please fill the feedback form that is shown so that we can improve on the next session. And link will be shared for post-webinar resources. We will share the tool. We will share the NbS guideline again, and also the recording of this webinar and all the presentation slides from the speakers. And I would just give a brief moment to Ludwig.
Yeah, yes, can you hear me? Yes. I just wanted to remind all participants that it's not only within the frame of this webinar series, but beyond that as well. At SPC, we remain available to support you in any of your NbS needs you may have, either for projects or for when talking about mainstreaming, if you need to be connected with some of our technical division for those who may not be already, because I know a lot of you are, but just wanted to reiterate that to you, and same for the standards. If you want to apply them, you have some issues, some question, more than happy to support you in that, like whether within the frame of the webinar series or even beyond. That's all I wanted to remind you of. Thank you everyone for joining today.
Thank you so much, Ludwig. So thank you all for joining. Let's continue this momentum by applying these standards locally, and stay tuned for your post-webinar materials, and we look forward to seeing you in our next session. We'll leave the QR code for at least two minutes so that you can fill the feedback, and also I will when I'm sharing the webinar resources, those who are not able to fill will share the link again. This feedback is very important for us to improve on the next webinar. Thank you so much.